Well, if you know what happened last week, then it would make sense. Okay, awesome. Yeah, let's get started then. Let's get this party started. So welcome everybody to our Monday, July the 27th edition of our conscious investing community. So tonight we're going to talk everything about creative strategies, creative structures on getting and acquiring your first property. And even if it's not your first property, how to get creative and start building that wealth portfolio. And so today we're going to be going through everything from a joint venture, what that is, how to create one, what are the moving parts in a joint venture. We're going to talk about AFS, we're going to talk about RTO, we're going to talk about what else we're going to talk about, a right to purchase. So a lot of these things maybe are unfamiliar grounds. Maybe some you guys have a major big wealth real estate portfolio and you've done this a gazillion times. Wherever you're at within your journey, I'm glad that you're here because you can either help support us in learning more or you can teach us as well. And so today I'm also joined by my lawyer and dear friend as well, Blaine, who's going to be coming on after me, after I talk a bit more about the different structures and how to formally legalize what it is that we're talking about. Because there's one thing to discuss it, and then there's another thing to have it formally legalized. So yeah, just landing a little bit. I was out traveling for inspections and walkthroughs today. It was a very busy day in the real estate world and just made it back into Burnaby, which is where I'm at right now. So for those of you who have never come on to our conscious investing community, my name is Alexis. I am a local realtor in Vancouver, but I also do practice beyond British Columbia as well. And my passion is about bringing great people together, community, and us forming this community was based on us just, learning different creative strategies on investing and creating wealth together. And so, yeah, just really excited to be here. I'm going to be sharing my screen as well and talking a bit about, so as we're going through, you guys, I want this to be interactive. I can see a few of you guys on here who are familiar faces, but feel free to ask questions along the way. We do have a smaller group today, and I'm more than happy to help answer any questions. Before we get started, I'm curious who in this room has done a joint venture before or even knows what a joint venture is. Can you type it in the chat? One, if you have. Two, if you're like, what's a JV? I don't even know what this girl's talking about. So if anyone's done a joint venture, Adam has done a JV. Nice, nice. Anyone else? Okay. Yes, I love that. Anyone else? I feel like Blaine, you might know what a JV is. I don't know.
I write
Maybe?
them all the time. Haven't done one.
No way. Huh. We might have to change that. Oh, and Sam's in the house too. Hey, Sam, we were just out last night. We all went out on this legacy yacht boat party with another one of our conscious investing community members, Vishal, who is an amazing host, and we all had a great time. We had a full table. It was a great way to network with other high net worth investors. Okay, amazing. So looks like we have a pretty mixed group in here on some people that know kind of roughly what JVs are, what joint ventures are, and kind of when you would use them and why. Okay, awesome. Love it. Well, let's get started. Just going to talk a bit about today. The information shared during today's presentation is for educational and informational purposes only and should not be considered financial, legal, tax, or investment advice. Please consult the appropriate professionals before making any investment decisions. All investing involves risk, so remember that. Let me know if you guys can see my screen. We good? Or no?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, thank you. Amazing. So there's that. Yeah, so this is, I think, a little bit off though. Can you guys, like, does it look, yeah, it looks a little off. Oh, well. Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about building wealth through creative like financing and different partnerships. And, you know, when we are talking about like creative investing, it's interesting because I get a lot of people share with me about, you know, common reasons why they don't get their first property, why they don't even start getting into building wealth through real estate. And you guys all know, like obviously I come from a real estate background. I'm a realtor. I started building my wealth through real estate, and that's how I got into my, you know, into investing in the first place. However, you know, it is a little bit more challenging now than ever to acquire real estate, but even just acquiring real estate, and I do talk about this a lot, is being able to leverage your assets to get more finances as well to diversify your portfolio. So it doesn't necessarily need to be in this specific strategy, which is real estate. You can always take equity that you have in your property, leverage that, and start, you know, investing in other asset classes as well, which we do talk about quite a bit in this group and in this community. So a lot of people think that you need 20% down, and like really that's not the case for a lot of people. For some people it is, but not necessarily for all. And so today we're going to talk about like different, you know, creative strategies that if you don't have the full 20% down, or maybe you just don't have any deposit, but you have a full-time job that would support being able to finance a property, right? So, and the other one is just that you need to qualify on your own. So you're just like, I don't want to team up with anybody else. I want to be able to do this on my own. Sometimes you're just going to be waiting years and years and years, where those 3 years that you've been waiting to save up for either the capital or to get that job that you need to have that financing for, now you could have gotten 2 properties in that time, right? So it's time is money. And for me, I always try to think outside the box and help others to think outside the box and, you know, building their portfolio, generating that wealth. So those 3 years that you could have been saving, that you'd be saving up for your one property. Let's say you bought another property. Now you're having equity in this one property. Now you can leverage that equity and you can take out that equity and you can start building even more wealth while still having equity in that one property and making some cash flow, right? So these are things that I like to think about to be able to diversify your portfolio, but you've got to start, right? And if you're just like, I don't have the means to do so, well, let's see what you do have. Let's start with your skills, okay? We all got skills. And I'm going to teach you guys today, and we're going to talk about what those skills can be and what it looks like. Also, you know, real estate is about solving problems, as I had mentioned. So, you know, there's different kind of structures that you can create to be able to get the property it is that you want. And a lot of the best investors that I know and the investors that I work with are those that we see the opportunity. So it's about looking at the opportunity and seeing, you know, what does the ROI look like on it? What does the cash flow look like on it? Is this a viable opportunity for now and in the future? And then from there, now we look at how to structure the deal. Right. And I know that it's kind of, it seems a little bit backwards because I know a lot of people wait till they have everything all in a row, but that's why you're here. So on a Monday night in the middle of summer, you're, instead of, you know, going out and having fun right now, you are investing in yourself and in your future for being here. So I got to give you guys props for that. It definitely takes a certain mindset to be able to educate yourself first on being here so that you can make those better decisions instead of just feeling defeated or that you have to wait forever and that you're never going to be able to afford a place. And so, every deal has three pieces. So now that we've kind of moved on from like mindset, because that's the biggest piece of this all is always in mindset. And you guys know I talk so much about mindset because it's not about necessarily, waiting for that perfect time or for that perfect moment. When you have the right mindset, it's like you make it happen. You see those opportunities and you go after it, right? And if you just look at the hurdles and you're not able to overcome them, then you're just going to stay in the same place that you've always been. But the reason why we're here and the reason why we have community and the reason why we have mentorship is so that we can look at these, I guess, like hurdles or roadblocks. And instead of just focusing on them or fixating on it, we look at the solutions to overcome it. Right. And then so we can get to our goals and that we can actually see the opportunity because you guys, once you see the opportunities and it happens in day-to-day life, like business opportunities, real estate opportunities, investing opportunities, you can see it so clearly. And then it just becomes exciting because then you can start playing, and acquiring different assets. And it's a lot of fun because then we can join together and do this in community. So coming back to the transaction itself. So let's say we find a really sweet property, right? It's cash flow positive, which, I was just at one today, where we were looking at a property there, and it's a cash flow positive operation with two streams of income. Cash flow probably about $1,000 a month, which is good. And it's 700,000-800,000, something around there. And so that's a good opportunity, right? Now, is every person going to have all three bits? Three being one for the transaction. One is the capital. So that is the actual money to support the project itself. So that could be a few different things. One is that it's the capital to get the financing itself. It could be the capital to support any kind of upgrades that you need to do to the property. Or let's say on one of my properties I bought, it did not have a basement suite yet. So I needed to inject a certain amount of capital into that project to bring it up and running to get multiple doors going. So, the capital partner is a pretty strong partner. And a lot of us, depending on how we want to structure the joint venture, that's usually like a stronger partner. But we're going to get to that in just a bit. Financing. So that's, this is an interesting one because this is when I'm looking for a financing partner, I'm looking for someone who can qualify. Right? For those of us who are entrepreneurs in the room here, those of us who are business owners, we know that we don't always have the ability to get projects financed, right? When I was a teacher, and for those of you in the room who don't know my background, I originally was a high school teacher before I got into real estate. And when I was a teacher, man, it was easy for me to get qualified. My very first property, I got qualified like that because I have steady income and banks love teachers. So it's easy for me to get my first property. And this is going back 15 years. This is dating me a little, but that's when I got my first property. And it was really easy. Now I look for JV partners who have more steady income because then they can qualify for the financing. In real estate and being a business owner, my income is up and down, right? It's not really super steady. And so people that we look for, entrepreneurs and business owners, like we love to look for people that have that stable income, that have a job. I know it sounds crazy, but if you have a job and you have a salary, that's like a golden ticket. That's your golden ticket, you guys. So if you're looking to partner with someone, but maybe you don't have all the capital, you want to team up with someone like me. You want to team up with someone who has some capital but maybe doesn't have the ability to qualify for a project, right? And then the third one is going to be the opportunity. So, that's the working partner, right? So the working partner is someone who has the education backing. Education backing meaning you're knowledgeable on how to look for opportunities, how to evaluate a property, how to look for something that's going to be cash flow. I have a fancy spreadsheet. I've shown you guys my spreadsheets, right? I love numbers. I love crunching numbers. I like to see if things cash flow, which are going to make me money. What's going to yield us some capital at the end of the month, right? And then also ROI. So we like to look at how is this asset going to appreciate over time? Because there's two parts to a transaction. There's one which is bringing you in cash flow. And as we know, cash is king. But as we're paying down that mortgage, we're also looking at our asset over time appreciate. And that's also what we're in it for. We're in it for appreciation. And a lot of people in Vancouver, as we know, in the years prior, there was a lot of appreciation, right? So people made some really, and I know some people that are on this call that have made some good moves in good times. And, believe it or not, now is that time as well, because the market has come down and we're in quite a saturated market as well, meaning that the absorption rate of sales to listings isn't quite where it used to be. And we're leaning more towards a buyer's market. And that's a lot of opportunity for people that are looking to either get their first property or, start to expand their portfolios. And there's ways to do that to avoid all of the tax implications that we've talked about before, and some creative strategies that we can use so that we can avoid those tax implications, right? And then joint ventures as well. So basically a joint venture, or JV is what we say, because it sounds cool if you just say, yo, I'm doing a JV, um, is a joint venture. Okay, so you can say JV, sounds cool. It's the lingo, or you can, say joint venture. It's just when like two or more people come together to combine their resources to support a real estate transaction, right? And so these are the three different pieces that we had gone through. And basically, if you wanted to start to expand your portfolio. So right now I'm in a position where I started to expand my portfolio. I've bought several properties on my own, and then I decided to start venturing out and doing some JVs. That's when you want to buy bigger properties. Maybe you start doing some maybe, multiple doors. Yeah, you can just scale faster as well, and then also share the risk. Once you start like getting your first property and you start getting properties and you understand the processes, you understand the risks, you understand the things that can go wrong, you just start learning, right? And I started with going to all these various investing in real estate groups and communities, right? There's groups that I'm part of, which is REN, the Women in Real Estate Investing Network, which I'm part of. Also REAG, Real Estate Action Group. There's RAIN, there's Keyspire, with Scott McGilvery. So there's all these, Mogul, I was a managing partner for the Vancouver, um, uh, real estate team there. And so they're all investor focused as well. And they teach all these different strategies because you got to keep up with it as well. Just because one strategy works in one market doesn't mean it's going to work in another market, which we're also going to get to. Some strategies that I've worked with in Alberta, we're just starting to see here in BC, which is really exciting because even just 6 years ago, when I started working here in the BC market, nobody knew what an AFS was. Barely anybody would do vendor financing. Now I'm seeing it on a lot of the realtor remarks when I'm looking at listings. That's really exciting for me because I love looking at these creative strategies on how we can joint venture together and really leverage our strengths to acquire properties, especially in this market, right? So if we can avoid tax implications, if we can buy when we're, at a lower part of the market than we ever have been, and we can also use these creative strategies to do the acquisitions, then it's really a win-win situation. It's even a win for the seller because a lot of times these guys have been holding on to their properties for a really long time. So it's a win-win situation, but it's just not as easy as it used to be when the market in 2022 is super popping, right? It's like people had to have their financing in place, and then, it was a really rigid order. Whereas now we need to think creatively to start to acquire properties, right? But before you partner, this is really, really important. You need to define what everybody's role is, right? Are you going to be the working partner? Are you going to be the capital partner? Are you going to be the one who's financing it? Maybe you're doing two things, right? So like, let's say for me, for example, I understand what a burr strategy is, right? We're not going to get into what a burr strategy is today, but I know what that is. And so if I'm targeting specific properties and I'm doing all that work, I am hustling, running numbers, I am understanding the strategy, I'm learning the demographics, I'm just really like keying in and targeting specific properties for a burr strategy, right? And then one comes up, boom, I take it, I put an offer in on it, I negotiate really hard on it, and then I get it. Now I have it tied up. So once I have a property tied up, now I'm considered the working partner because I learned everything there was to learn about the burr strategy. I went out and well, I'm the realtor, but if I had a realtor, then you go out with the realtor and you tie it up. So you have skin in the game. Everybody needs to have some skin in the game when we're talking about joint ventureship, because you want to have something that's on the line, whether it be your hard-earned capital, whether it be you taking the time to learn about all these different strategies, then that's your skin in the game because that's your time, right? You understand it inside and out. If I quizzed you on what these kinds of strategies are, you would be able to answer because you have your power team with you, you understand what your numbers are, you understand the strategy, you went to all of these courses, you learned. That's your skin in the game. Someone has their financial backing on, then that's their skin in the game because now they're on title, right? So some people come to me and they want to tie up properties, but they haven't learned, they haven't taken the time to understand what any of these strategies are about. A lot of the strategies we can't do in BC anymore, like fix and flips, especially with a lot of the new rules, the government legislation. However, there's still a lot of like amazing strategies. I talk a lot about this. If you visit my YouTube channel, please like and subscribe under Alexis Kavanaugh Realty. I talk about a lot of these strategies, corporate rentals, not necessarily short-term rentals here as much anymore, but we talk about all these different types of strategies. Why? Because I've taken the time and I've taken all of the courses, and then I started to teach this as well. You can too. And so I would love to invite you to come to another session when I'm talking about these different strategies to learn. Because then once you have that education under your belt, now you can start going out there and leveraging that, right? That's your skill set. That's your skin in the game. But defining everyone's role, muy importante. And then also agree on everything ahead of time. So my joint venture partners and I have a calculated like list of items, and it also will vary depending on, so I have a template, but it varies depending on the type of project that we're working on. Because if we're doing something that, I'm moving into versus something that I'm not going to be moving into, just like a pro tip, it is beautiful in BC if you can have one partner, that could be the working partner, who moves into the property. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but there's a lot of benefits if you can do that. And then, yeah, agree on the profit sharing. So, a lot of people do like a waterfall. Some people do, exits along the way. Some people, there's so many creative strategies that you can think of. And I know Blaine's going to be talking about that as well later on. But just understanding what you want to do. You might reinvest it into it. You might want to pay it down. You might want to do a Smith maneuver, right? There's just so many exciting ways that you can learn how to pay off a property faster. I know someone in this room who has a special strategy. as well on how to pay down a property in less than 5 years, he says. So there's a lot of really amazing strategies that you can use. And then most important, one of the most important things, because it's all fun and games, y'all, until someone wants to exit, right? It's almost like a divorce. So this is like a prenup. You want to make sure that you all have an exit strategy in place and at what timeline. So if somebody needs to exit prior to the agreed upon timeline, then too bad, so sad, right? Because you've all agreed to it upon writing, unless, if you decided to put some kind of a clause into your joint venture, which I don't know, Blaine, we'll probably get to that in a little bit, ahead of time, then we can kind of know what that kind of exit clause would look like and how you can utilize it earlier. And yeah, so yeah, the three different partners as we had talked about before. Remember, write this down, you guys. Capital partner, working partner, financing partner. And I know that a lot of us who might not have all of the capital, who might not have, jobs that support getting a, $1 million project, then the working partner is where it's at. But you got to put in the time. It's not an easy come, easy go. This is not an instant gratification, you guys. I've spent years and years learning all of these strategies, teaching all of these strategies, understanding the ins and the outs, and it's still ever changing because government legislation, world economics, and the world is always in a constant state of flux. So it's understanding these strategies, and then when you see the opportunity, you know what kind of a strategy that would work really well with that, right? And so understanding where your skill set is within this whole joint ventureship is really what the magic component is. So different types of JV structures that we can look at. You can have a straight up 50-50. That's typically what I do. If you were just a working partner, it probably would not be a 50-50. You might want to have maybe you just want to have 10%. But that 10%, you can start to grow. You can at least get your foot in the door. And that's purely by you just taking the time and coming on here on Mondays and learning. I love teaching these different kinds of strategies because it's going to empower you to make these big decisions and to start to build that wealth faster. You can have an unequal ownership, 70-30, 60-40, whatever. So, I mean, let's say you have someone who puts in the capital. Let's say you have someone who's more of the qualifying partner, and then maybe the person who's also putting in 50% of the capital also is the working partner, but maybe doesn't have the financing. So you still do 50-50. And because that working partner, the working partner it's the person who's going to be learning all of the strategies. You find it, you acquire it, and then you move into it, or you're the one who's like, let's say you're doing the property management. Let's say that you're the one who's doing the books. Let's say that you're the one who's, you're working the property. Maybe there needs to be an uplift on the property as well. So you need to inject some more capital, but you can do some of the work. So that's the sweat equity in the property. You do the floors, you do the cabinets, you do the property up. And then maybe, yeah, one partner fills two roles. Maybe you have three completely separate partners. It's up to you how you want to do that. A lot of places where I find my JV partners are going to be in communities just like this, right? So communities that are teaching people how to invest in real estate and how different types of strategies work. The other ones that I had mentioned as well. So like REAG, that's a really big one. RAIN, Keyspire, REN, all of those. I go to Land Rush Summit every year as well, which is in Vancouver. And there's just different places that you can meet people that you think would be good to team up with. But you got to start that relationship. It doesn't come just overnight. It's not, Alexis, can you get me a JV partner, please? That's not how it works, So even you and I need to know, I need to test your knowledge, right? What do you know about these kinds of strategies? I know that, there's some people on this call right now that has gone to, the off-grid dream, and she has taken the time. She has went to the entire course. She has, taken their whole program, has done the business plan. So, She's on the call right now. That's Mia. Yeah. I was doing a little shout out to you because she took the time and educated herself. And this is something that I think is really important for each and every one of you that are on this call to know that you need to take the time to understand how this all works. Because if you just want to like come in and then be like, okay, this is my vision, because a lot of people have dreams. I have dreams, right? How do we make those dreams a reality? And so it's taking the time to learn how everything works. And so she took the time on how to create and set up an off-grid community. Right. And so she diligently, and we have our quarterly meetings, right? To make sure that she's on track, to make sure that her goals are coming to fruition and that she's still taking all like doing her due diligence. So that way when we do team up with a capital partner, someone who's going to help fund the project, she's on the ball. She's like, okay, this is how we're going to make this work. So we need to make sure that you're able to showcase all of the numbers, how it works, because someone who has their hard-earned money, they don't want to just give their capital away and hope for the best. We need to prove that, and we need proof of concept. So a lot of people that I work with, I need to ensure that they've done their work and that they put in the time. So thanks, Thesmia, for for doing that.
Thanks for the shout out. I'm actually going back up there in 2 weeks.
Oh, no
Yeah,
way.
I'm excited. I'll
Okay.
definitely send you updates.
Yeah, please do. And so other things that we're looking at, just kind of how the profits are going to be split as well. So are you going to be retaining the cash flow? If it's a cash flow positive property, are you going to be retaining that cash flow? What kind of returns do you want to have? The waterfalls as well. That's like if there's just so many different kinds of strategies that you can do. There can be someone who injects a certain amount of capital, but then you agree that they're going to have that percentage back from that initial capital, but they're going to take that returns within waterfall. So that's like, let's say on a quarterly basis, they're the ones who are going to be taking that return until it's actually up to place. And yeah, just kind of before I have a full template. So if you guys work with me, then I would be more than happy to provide a JV template for you. I know I'm working with, I think there's like another client in here that there's a few clients in here that I'm working with on various joint venture deals right now, myself included. And I'm just about to close on a property in a few weeks here. And I decided to be the working partner. I'm also the qualifying partner and the capital partner, but in order to avoid the capital gains tax and the property transfer tax and some GST, it's like I'm moving into it and also going to be renting out another component of the property as well. And so that's something that you can discuss as well. I'm happy to kind of go through what this would look like because there's just so many different strategies that you can have. And in and of itself alone, an investor loves someone who could claim this as their primary. That means your property that you live in, because there's a lot of tax implications, especially in British Columbia, that are involved. Not to mention that you need 20% down or more when you're looking at an investment property. Whereas if it's your primary residence and you do qualify, you can get away with as little as 5% down with a lot of properties. So it's just something to consider. You don't need to save up, for years and years. A lot of times, just being able to say, hey, I'm able to move into this property and I can manage this property and I can work this property. That in and of itself is a pretty big component to having a joint venture. But making those decisions before you actually move into the property is critical, right? So you want to make sure that you've gone through the template, that you've researched everything and that you understand. So some other things also, and I'm just going to brief you guys on this. I'm not going to take a lot of time on this because each of these next creative strategies, I could literally spend an hour on each, kind of delving into it all. Vendor financing, this is one where the seller essentially becomes the bank. So instead of going to the bank for getting a loan, we can say, hey, can we just get some vendor financing? And then the seller is the one who's going to be financing part of it or even all of it. So let's say you have a sizable deposit. You know that you're going to be able to qualify in a couple of years, but maybe you don't right now. The seller really needs to sell, but they don't need the full amount right now. They need to move, right? They need to get out of wherever they're at. It could be someone who's aging, our aging population. This is a great one because a lot of them just want to go into their retirement home, but they don't necessarily need like $2 million right now. They can wait for a few years. And it's great because it gets someone who's maybe a family that just had a baby or something, and they really need that house, but they can't quite get the financing for it yet. Vendor financing. This is a great opportunity to approach the seller and ask if the seller would be open to financing it. And then we put that all in writing. We have Blaine do it up, and it's all, we get it all legalized, and then you can move in. So it's a win-win scenario. And that's, as I'd mentioned, there's a lot of flexibility like with the on the seller's end of things as well. And the benefits of that, you don't need a lot of cash, flexible repayment. You're basically just talking with the vendor, the seller itself, and we negotiate the terms as well. And AFS, so this is a spicy little one that I love. AFS deals I've done in Alberta quite often. They're relatively new to BC. And that's the seller financing with a delayed title transfer. So this is where the buyer, they're agreeing to purchase the property today. The buyer will take possession. They have a lot more control of the property than something like an RTO, which is a rent to own, or a right to purchase as well. And that's nice because the seller, so the benefit to the buyer is the buyer can move in and the buyer has like full control of the property. It's like they own it, right? But the title isn't technically transferred to the seller until they do actually get their financing in place, right? So in the interim, let's say on the last deal that we were just talking about, that we wanted to get some seller financing, but instead we decide to do an AFS because they need to move, right? They're like, okay, we're at our wits' ends. We can't sell this, but we need to get out. Now the buyer comes in and is like, okay, I'll take possession of this because I want to have full control over this. Maybe, you want to start fixing the place up. You want to start doing things with it. But the seller still holds on to the title until they receive the full until they receive the full funds. So yeah, an AFS deal, love AFSs because it's a win-win scenario while still protecting both the seller and the buyer. Right to purchase. This one is basically you're getting the control now, but you're purchasing it later. So instead of buying, the property, you're buying the exclusive right to buy it later. Okay, so as opposed to an AFS deal where you are doing the acquisition, but the title is just not transferred till later, this one you're actually buying the exclusive right. And, same thing, you just, maybe the buyer just needs a little bit more time. Maybe you still need to get some more capital and maybe you need to get your credit scores better, improved, and you just don't quite have your financing yet, but you know that you are on the road to success. And this just like puts a little bit of a fire underneath you. Sometimes we need a little fire. I'm a little bit of a pusher. I think sometimes we need a little push to kind of get ourselves in the real estate doors. And this one is a great opportunity where you still have a lot more of a control than you would an RTO, right? So an RTO is a rent to own, which we're going to get to in just a little bit, and the reasons why I don't necessarily love them. So this is just a little table. So agreement for sale, AFS, the property is sold, title's just not transferred. Right to purchase, property is not technically you own, you have the right to purchase. So the buyer has like the option, whereas on an AFS, it's locked in. You're locked in, right? So the right to purchase, it's buying you the right. You're not technically locked in. AFS, seller finances it, whereas the right to purchase, the buyer pays for the control. Okay. So you're still under control with that one. However, an AFS, like you're locked in it. Same with the AFS, the buyer like will take possession. And then with the right to purchase, the seller usually keeps possession, but a lot of the rights to purchase that we do, the buyer does move into it. And so, yeah, I guess just on that note, before the other strategies, the rent to own opportunities as well. So you've probably seen a lot of them. And I take a lot of real estate courses and learning how to build wealth in real estate. And from a landlord's perspective, a rent to own is amazing because it gives you all of the control with like minimal risk. Plus, you're taking a hefty deposit from the buyer, from your tenant. So a rent to own, that's the other strategy that I think a lot of renters who are in this room would have heard about. And it does put you at a huge risk, I'll be honest, right? So to a landlord, it's beneficial because you get a sizable deposit and you can take that deposit if the tenants decide not to become buyers, right? Whereas these other strategies that I talked about, like the right to purchase, for example, that gives you a lot more control with as a buyer, right? So I definitely, love to take the time and go through any of the nuances about this. I know that was a lot of information in a short period of time, and I do break these each down in a more timely fashion as well. And I do my action for traction, as I know a lot of you guys have come to my workshops where I teach these different creative strategies and I team up with other like-minded individuals, and you can creatively work together, understanding that there's just so many strategies. Maybe, on another deal that I'm working with right now, maybe you have a family member who can move into the property and maybe you guys both split the deposit, right? And maybe one person can qualify, but the other person's like an entrepreneur. But it's really great also when you can work with family because there's a lot of advantages to that. But the biggest thing also is working with the best guidance. And this is where support really matters. And so I have my lovely lawyer in the room right now, which Blaine Cowan, he's a dear friend of mine, but also a lawyer who can talk about all of these various strategies. And I'm just so excited to have you in the room, Blaine.
Thank you so much, Alexis. Just want to give you a shout out and thank you for having me on today to talk about joint ventures in real estate. And I've seen them come up a lot lately, so it's exciting to be able to talk about them. So let me see if I can get my screen shared here.
Are you on as
Oh, I need to send a request.
okay. I think, Michael, you're gonna have to do that as your host. Unless
I
maybe.
just gave you permission, Blaine.
Okay.
Okay,
Thanks,
I'll try
Michael.
again.
Okay, take it away, Blaine.
Right. Can
And
you
for
see
those of
this?
you, no, we can't see it.
Okay, one sec.
And for those of you who need some legal advice, Blaine is amazing. He works tirelessly. Like, I haven't even talked to him for like a week. I've been trying to call him, but he's so busy that, yeah, he's doing so many deals. I love it. Okay, Blaine, take it away.
Hey, so good evening, everybody. It's great to be here. For anyone I haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name's Blaine. I'm a corporate solicitor for Ontario and Company. I work downtown. Looking forward to talk to you about joint ventures today. So I want to say at the outset that this is one of those terms people tend to use like, very casually. In ordinary conversation, people will say stuff like partnership, but what they really mean is we're working together. Or they'll say joint venture because it sounds more formal. But legally, those words are not interchangeable. The distinction can affect like your liability, your decision making, your accounting, your tax reporting, and even like your small business deduction in your company. So my goal is not to turn this into like a technical tax lecture or like a deep dive in BC legislation. Those issues definitely matter, and I'll touch on them to some extent. But I just want to make it simpler and more digestible for you guys. So when people come together to do a project, the way they describe and document the relationship can have very real consequences. So the theme I want you to keep in mind with this presentation is that structure is not just like paperwork. Structure is part of your deal. If the structure doesn't match your commercial arrangement or your commercial goals, then the parties to the venture can discover later that they're in a deal they didn't think that they were making. So why joint ventures matter? So why do they matter? The simple answer is the most meaningful real estate projects, sometimes they're too large or they're too expensive or they're too specialized for one person to be able to carry out by themselves. So in real estate, very few significant projects are completed by one person acting alone. One person may own land, another could have access to capital, someone else could understand construction. Or in some cases, none of them have any idea how to do something. They pool money for an expert, and that's oftentimes when I come in. So, for example, I'm doing a subdivision for a property in Parksville right now. And whenever you're doing a subdivision, you have to deal with the municipality. People don't even think about that. But every municipality in BC, they all want something different. So oftentimes when you're developing in a rural area in BC, you're taking on something you might not realize. And that's when having proper support really matters. So my roadmap for this presentation is going to basically be like describing what a partnership is, how that and a joint venture are different, and how that distinction can have legal and tax consequences for you. And I'll use a simple case study to try to make the point a little more concrete. And after that, we'll bring the example back to a real estate setting. And then I'll just maybe go into some drafting issues, how to avoid accidentally ending up in a partnership, and the kinds of things that probably do belong in a joint venture agreement. So what is a partnership? Well, this is where people can accidentally create obligations they didn't mean to create. A lot of business owners assume that a partnership, it only exists if there's a signed partnership agreement, and that's not true. It's not the law. If two or more people carry on business together with a view to profit, a court could very well decide. They could impute. It's called imputing a partnership on you, even if that's not what the parties called it. Maybe they want to call it a joint venture. So the legal requirements for a partnership become really important. They focus on less of the form of your document and more on like the substance of your relationship. A partnership will generally involve like an ongoing business relationship where you're carrying on business together with a view to profit. That means like you're not just cooperating on an isolated task or for a short period of time. You're participating in like a common wide-ranging business activity, and often making decisions together or having authority to make decisions that can bind like your partner or your joint venturists. That looks a lot more like a partnership than a joint venture. And once that characterization applies, several consequences can follow. Partners owe duties to one another. So normally, like joint venture property is owned by each joint venturist. But with a partnership, that property is often pooled. What else? Your partnership profits could be divided up differently. Partnership legislation might end up applying to you, in which case your governance, your liability, and your accounting changes. In a partnership, for example, there's a whole level of accounting that is mutual before it even gets down to the individual participants. It also can affect your small business deduction if you're a Canadian company. So in practical terms, this means that compared to a joint venture, you have way less control. And in a major real estate project, that can be an uncomfortable surprise for folks. So in contrast, what is a joint venture then? And compared to a joint venture from a business point of view, it can look really, really similar to a partnership. You have people that contribute assets, expertise, you have people that contribute money, and everyone hopes to earn a return. The important difference is that a joint venture is usually much more narrow, it's much more intentional, it's much more controlled by a contract. It's typically very limited to a specific project or a specific period of time. And all the parties generally remain independent businesses or independent entities rather than merging into one ongoing enterprise. Now, you can't do that. It's possible to do that if you have very, very detailed corporate articles, but it's a much kind of messier way of going about it. I draft those all the time. You have to be very specific about what people's duties are, what the scope of the project is, and that each party has their own counsel to review the project as well, and the contract. I talked about partnerships being able to bind other people into legal agreements. In a joint venture, that really shouldn't be a thing. You're all independent. Each party may also retain ownership of its own assets unless the agreement specifically says otherwise. For example, if you're putting your own land into a joint venture, then you're presumed, at least by like the CRA and by a court of law, to be selling it to other joint venture participants at a fair market value. And to do that, it often has to be, you have to have controls built into a contract. In real estate, that distinction can be critical. A landowner could contribute access to the land without becoming responsible for every development obligation, while a developer in a joint venture can manage the project without acquiring ownership of the land, or at least not until milestones have been met. Like sweat equity is, it's a genuine way of buying in. A joint venture is generally a contractual relationship. Parties agree to collaborate on a specific project while remaining separate entities. And again, instead of legislation deciding how it works, like BC partnership legislation, typically the parties negotiate the rules that they want to be bound by themselves. Another helpful feature is that joint ventures can be temporary. It can be carefully documented for one acquisition or one development or one subdivision, one build to rent project or one redevelopment. When that project ends, the relationship can also end. This is very different from creating a broad partnership that suggests ongoing business for years to come. In a properly drafted joint venture, the parties have much more control and flexibility. Ownership can remain separate. Risks are allocated based on what each participant's threshold for risk is. Voting thresholds can be much more customized. Capital contributions can be negotiated, and exit rights and deadlock provisions are built in before a dispute ever arises. I often will put in a clause for an exit, basically fair market value, but it's a shotgun clause typically, just to avoid messy court battles. It's generally much more cost efficient. That's kind of
Can we
the
go through
novel
what the
thing.
shotgun clause is real quick for those of us who don't know?
Oh, sure. Shotgun clause is just an option. You don't have to exercise. It's an option for any joint venture venturists, call them joint venturists, to exercise at any time. You can customize them around certain circumstances if you want to exercise one. And that's your exit. That's your get out of jail card if you're not happy with where your joint venture is going. It's very flexible. Typically, you just sell your interest. That's all you have to do. You don't have to get even bought out by someone in there. You can have a clause that just you give first option for people in the joint venture to buy you, but then if they're not interested, you can find a buyer on your own.
Yeah, it's just like if you were to shoot the other person, but really it's like you'd be shooting yourself. Shotgun clause.
Exactly. Well, if it's that much of a toxic relationship, as long as someone's getting shot, right?
True, true. But it's good to put in there.
Okay, so I'm from the East Coast. You knew I was going to bring up fishing.
I love it.
So let's leave real estate for a moment. I'm going to try and do like a practical example here. So we'll go fishing. Imagine you have three people. You have Sarah. Sarah has a fishing license. You have Michael. Michael has a fishing vessel. And then you have David. He's the money guy. We always love the money guy. Individually, none of them can run a business, right? Sarah doesn't own a boat. Michael doesn't have a license to be able to use his boat. David has neither, but he's got money, which is great. Together, all three of them have all the pieces they need, to make a functioning venture, maybe for a season. If you work in real estate, this all probably already sounds familiar. So the reason I like this example is it's easy to see the economics of it. The value is created only when the pieces are combined. Sarah's license unlocks the legal right to fish. Michael's vessel makes the fishing possible, and David's capital funds it. If any one of them is missing, it won't work. So the same thing happens in real estate. A site could be valuable, but if it's undeveloped land, it may not produce like the return that the owner wants. The development expertise may be valuable, but it needs a project, it needs land. And capital could be available, but it needs an opportunity. So the joint venture is the mechanism that allows all of those interests to come together. So it shows why value should not be measured only by cash. Sarah's license may be the most important contribution, but it doesn't necessarily like write the largest check, right? Same thing with real estate. The land could be foundational to the entire project, but if the landowner is not able to develop it on their own, then bringing in a developer to bring that values, that's key. Let's see. So just go over the contributions again. Nobody contributes the same thing. Sarah contributes the licenses. Michael contributes the equipment. David contributes the capital. Same thing with real estate, land, financing, construction expertise, municipal relationships, and project management is additional expertise that's often needed with these sorts of things. And it's fine. All these contributions are totally different. It's totally fine for them to be different. You can just agree on a value to be able to buy in. Now, what if it was a partnership? Our three fishermen never necessarily intended to create a partnership. They had a shared bank account. Their contracts were never really explicit about the scope or the time or exactly what the project was. They have a shared budget for things like marketing, and with management, with their decision making, all of a sudden they're letting members of their joint venture bind each other into agreements. If a party looks to the character, or if a government body looks to the character of it, it doesn't necessarily look like a joint venture. And then you might end up being reassessed by the CRA. They might say, no, this is partnership income. And that can affect your small business deduction. I've seen small business deductions go from 500,000 to being split 3 different ways. Like that can happen with Canadian small businesses that are attempting to be in a joint venture, but they're deemed to be in a partnership. And just to rewind.
What would be the defining, I mean, you might get to this, Blaine, but how can you differentiate it?
Really, it just comes down to your contract, right? Your support needs evidence to be able to argue for you. It's often going to be an accountant that's dealing with the CRA, but I'd be designing like a contract, part of the evidence to show exactly what it is. So the best way of avoiding that characterization is to really write it into your joint venture contract. Specifically, this is what, Alexis is bringing into it, or this is what Blaine is bringing into it, this is what Tasmia is bringing into it, and it's specifically in this scope for this project or this series of projects, and then this agreement or this like joint venture will terminate on that point. It could be time-based as well, like with my fishing example, you do it for 1 or 2 seasons and then you go your separate ways. It's making sure that duties and decision making is also very clearly lined up. So these are ways of doing it. It's kind of a factorial analysis that gets done to decide if it's a joint ventureship or a partnership. And the more like dominoes you can stack up, or maybe not dominoes is the right comparison, but the more factors you can stack up in your favor, the better, right? And that's what support's for. So rewinding the story, the agreement makes it clear that Sarah keeps her licenses, Michael keeps his vessel, David keeps his capital. As I said, nobody's accidentally transferring ownership just because they're working together. A party can in fact just sell their interest to get out, and that could be a shotgun clause, as I described earlier. That's the strength of a joint venture. The commercial deal may look the same as a partnership, but the legal framework is different. Parties have way more control over the relationship in this way.
Mm-hmm. And it's more clearly defined, I think, like as you're going through the joint venture agreement and all the different scenarios, it just feels that like the JV structure, it's more clearly defined.
Exactly. Yeah, definition is the key part about a joint venture contract. It's a great point. I just put a slide up here, it just shows some factors. It's yes, no. The more yeses, the closer you are to having risk of being characterized as a partnership. Are you working together on a business? Yes. Carrying on business together? Yes. Sharing profits and losses? Again, you have to look at this is very broad. The more broad, the more it's narrow, the more likely you're going to be able to argue you're a joint venture. You're only in business for a short time and it's going to be ending soon. It's for this one trade or this one venture. And then again, mutual control and decision making, I think, is one of the key ones. If you're independent entities and you can't necessarily be bound, or you can't necessarily bind your other joint venturists, then that's a very telling sign, right? That points you more towards joint venture than partnership. Let's move this along. So again, just some advantages of joint ventures. You have greater access to capital if you're pooling resources. You're sharing risk, or you can decide your own risk tolerance. One person can offer to be a personal guarantor. That's basically someone who's going to be taking on personal liability for loans. It's very common when you're getting, money from a bank, for example, or from a private lender, that you write a personal guarantee. Another advantage, you take on a larger project than you can take on a loan. You have greater flexibility. You can grow faster if you have access to more resources, and you're combining everyone's expertise. And then there are tax considerations. So just to go into a little bit on tax, a joint venture is different from a partnership. Each participant computes their own taxes. They do their own year ends. They have their own relationships with the CRA. There's no partnership accounting. It's very important for corporate participants. I mentioned it earlier, but it's with the small business deduction annual limit. If a business is carried on through a partnership, then partnership income rules can apply. And in many situations, that can limit the multiple that corporate partners are able to get access to. A properly structured joint venture may produce a different result because each partner or participant is generally doing their own income directly. So I generally encourage clients to involve both a lawyer and their accountant before deciding how they would, structure their venture. The important point is one structure is not always better than the other. There's different ways of structuring a joint venture. You could have 3 individuals, you could have 2 companies and an individual. There's a lot of different flexibility to it. The point is that the choice needs to be deliberate, because once that project is underway, changing the structure can be really complicated and really expensive. How are we doing on time, Alexis?
Well, we're a little bit past, but I think you're really
Okay.
on to like something I think that might be on a lot of people's minds also, like as it pertains to like co-ownership
Okay.
agreements and putting that in place. Like, let's say there was like a couple and they wanted to get together and buy a property, right? A lot of people do that, especially in our
Mhm.
day and age, right? They're like, okay, let's get married and go buy a place. And that sounds all amazing, but I think doing your due diligence, like what we're talking about right now, and it might not be considered a JV, right? This like
Yeah.
would be more of like a co-ownership agreement, but having that really clearly laid out and talking about these things like financial contributions, ownership, is it 50-50? Like what's the split? Like what's the ongoing expenses? It's obviously not the most romantic way of starting out, buying a property, but I mean, the more conversations that we've had over the years, it's like the more that we can see the value in doing this in the beginning.
Good point. I'll just skip to the end then, and then we can move on to questions, or just follow your lead on how you want to move forward.
Yeah, I was just
So
thinking about like different types of um like ownership as we were on the topic of like joint ventureship or partnerships as well.
it's a great point. Yeah, with property ownership, it depends, right, on what the best structure, what the most beneficial arrangement's going to be. I see different fact patterns or situations all the time. So just like a final takeaway on this, a joint venture it's not just a legal label, it's a business strategy that works if the structure actually reflects the commercial deal. If you're looking at a real estate venture, I suggest answering these 3 really key questions early. What exactly is each party contributing? What decisions must be controlled, and who's making the decisions? And what happens if the project doesn't fold as you expect? You need to have a good exit provision in.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thanks for listening to me, guys.
I love that. Yeah, thanks so much, Blaine. Yeah, I'm just thinking about like different scenarios where people could, utilize these types of strategies and like in what scenario, right? Like let's say it's not a couple. Let's say it's like um, a brother sister, for example, right? And then they want to come together. One person is able to support like the finances for it, and then the other person is able to move into the property, and maybe they also help with the like part of the finances as well. What kind of an agreement would they do?
Oh gosh. So can you repeat that? Just focusing on sharing the screen.
Yeah, like a brother-sister scenario. Are you
Oh,
okay to do
yeah.
a couple questions here? Because I just wanted to, I'm just thinking about these different scenarios because a lot of people that are on this call, I want them to think about their situation and how they, what kind of a structure that they would be able to utilize to start getting properties, right? And so I'm just
Yeah.
thinking like, either like you're a couple and you want to do an acquisition, maybe you are a brother, sister, or like a family member. I know that your family does a lot of real estate as well, so maybe there's different types of strategies that or structures that would work well.
Yeah, I know it's a great question. Typically, joint property ownership is always a great way to go. If you have a spouse, that will just pass through. If for estate planning purposes, it passes through with avoiding probate, passes through with avoiding a lot of issues that you'd have with tenants in common, right? If someone passes away, for example, I do a lot of estate planning. So this is one of the things I always look at is it's individual joint ownership goes to the survivor of two people or all of the people that are on that property. Tenants in common, someone passes away, then that share would just go either into their will or would often get sold at fair market value and would often trigger capital gains on that portion of the property.
And tenants, you guys who are on this call, I know you're thinking that that means a rental tenant, but it doesn't. Right, Blaine?
Exactly,
Tenants
yeah.
in
Tenant in
common?
common is an owner. They own that share. But very common. If you're owning real estate in a joint venture, you're probably a tenant in common on your portion of the land that has to be sold at fair market value if it's being disseminated between all of you.
Yeah, amazing. So yeah, I don't know if you guys have any other questions. I know that we are past time, so I totally get it if you guys need to leave. But if you have any questions, we have Blaine, if you still have a few minutes,
Yeah, yeah, of
do
course.
a
Yeah.
little Q&A
Where's the
for
time?
us. And feel free to ask either of us questions.
I'll do my best.
Yeah, thanks so much, Blaine. That was so good. Okay, Robert, you got your hand up.
Trying to have something. You hear me well?
I can hear you.
Okay, so for Blaine first, which jurisdictions do you operate in, and what are your other specialties that you work on?
Sure. Yeah, I'm called to the bar in Newfoundland, but I'm non-practicing status in Newfoundland and operate in British Columbia. But I can take any deal in British Columbia. I get stuff from Vancouver Island all the time, the lower mainland. Not too much like in the inner mainland, the odd thing from there. I've done some deals in Kelowna, I've done some deals in places I'm not fully sure where they are in the province. 100 horse something. Yeah, no, I do them all over the province.
So
Any kind of real
all of
estate.
BC.
Yeah, in BC specifically, yes.
Any other provinces? No.
No, just these two.
Okay, and then you're doing corporate stuff too, and what other?
Yeah, I do a lot of wills and estates planning. I do corporate commercial, real estate. We're often lender side counsel for BMO, pretty close relationships with BMO. Oh, Sam. Yeah, shout out to Sam.
Yeah. Love it.
What are your fees like for closing a property with, say, agreement for sale, purchase, option to purchase, or vendor take back, or just a
That's a great
regular?
question. Honestly, it really depends on the file. I always give an estimate. I don't give a quote. I try to keep it quite reasonable. Real estate started around 1,500 or so, but it depends on what's involved with it. As I mentioned earlier, I have a joint venture and that I'm working on in Vancouver Island. Originally, the scope was 2,000, but there's been a whole lot of other stuff that cropped up afterwards because every municipality they want different things, right? So you're not sure what each one's gonna want until you start kind of digging into it. So that's gone up to 4 now. I think we'll probably get that closed pretty soon. But there's always unexpected asks that municipalities tend to ask.
Great.
Thanks, Robert. Amazing. Love the questions.
And for Alexis,
Thanks,
um,
Robert.
and maybe even Blaine can chime in. How do you split the pie? So, I'm seeing a lot of expertise, management, you got land, collateral, co-signer, personal guarantee, capital financing, reputation, maybe connections. How do you allocate? I know it's different type of strategies, maybe have different pies, but what's your like go-to or main couple? Give us an idea of how you allocate a joint venture.
Yeah, I mean, I've done quite a few, and I've helped a lot of people with various joint ventures over the years, and really it's on a case by case basis. Like I said, there's three components to it: the capital partner, the financing partner, and then the working partner. So it depends on what each person really wants out of it and who needs what as well, right? So if I have like a really sweet property tied up and the cash flow is like really good and it's in an amazing location that I know I can also put a little bit of sweat equity into it to increase the value. Now, that's a good price to have, right? If I have just like a simple condo, it has like okay cash flow, maybe I'm the one who needs, I really need to have a place, so I'm working as a working partner and I have a little bit of capital. Now, that's not as enticing for a third partner, right? So you might have a little bit less of equity on that one. It's on
What
a
about
case by case
percentages?
basis.
Like,
It's a good question. Can I weigh in?
Yeah, go for it, Blaine.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, yeah, honestly, it is a business decision at the end of the day, and how shrewd, a business person is to get a good deal. But it helps to get objective standards. Accountants have their own formulas that they use to determine the value of a business or the value of an asset. That's always a really good starting place. I'm doing a joint venture agreement for another company right now. I'm counsel for one of the joint venturists, and they had like chairs. This was the other joint ventures. They had some chairs valued at $100,000, and that was not objective. We brought an accountant in, valued the company at about half of what they were asking. That's a much more reasonable starting point. And it's more fair for a starting point as well. It's a better way to get a more objective standard and a more informed negotiating, I don't know, stance for all
but if you're doing
parties.
valuation of a business, if it's pre-revenue business because you haven't bought the property yet,
Mhm.
like I hear money partners often get 50% or something like that. But then there's also, if someone's helping you to get approved for a mortgage, how do you value that in a profit split in terms of, is that considered money partner, or even a third category? And how much percent would you allocate to someone who gives you credit, no cap,
Yeah,
or any other?
yeah, I guess another thing you could do is look at companies of comparable size and their performance, and then you can get another objective measure through that. If you can find an objective measure, that's always the best way forward when it comes to negotiation, I think.
Definitely. Amazing.
Yeah, get
Sam,
a
I
feel
saw
for
your
what
question
other.
in the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah, estate planning perspective, probably having a secondary will, or what I call a corporate will, those are always really good. You can actually have two wills in BC. BC and Ontario are the only provinces where you can do this, and it just lets you pass your business assets specifically onto your beneficiaries without those going through probate. So if, it's three companies that are performing a joint venture like together, it's a very like no fuss, no muss way of passing on business assets that you're bringing into it to your beneficiaries.
Great questions, you guys. Does
Alexis,
anyone else have any more questions?
you mentioned, Alexis, there's no more fix and flips in BC. Can you elaborate on that?
That what, sorry?
No more fix and flips.
Well, with the new restrictions, it hasn't been a key strategy that a lot of people have been utilizing lately.
Which restrictions? I'm not familiar.
Being able to sell, that's the anti-flipping laws. Yeah.
Within a year,
So-
right?
Yeah, so I mean, but as we know, time is money. So usually if you get in there, you want to flip it before, and actually, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's 2 years.
Is it for tax purposes, like you get dinged, or is it just you're not allowed?
Yeah, there's tax implications, which, yeah, consult with an accountant on that, but it's something that strategy is not I mean, this would be a great market for it if we didn't have those restrictions, but
They can do it, you'll just pay too much in tax, so it's not worth it.
yeah. Yeah, when I run the numbers, it just doesn't make sense. So, yeah, what does make sense is just moving into the property for a little bit and avoiding all of these taxes. Well, we're definitely past time, you guys, so I'm just going to see if there's any, yeah, I don't know if you had any closing statements at all, Blaine, but I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on and, you know, not tax advice. Exactly. This is not tax advice or financial advice.
I just want to thank you all for being a great crowd. It was a pleasure to talk to you all today. And thank you again to Alexis. A shout out to you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure, Blaine. Always love chatting and sharing your expertise and wisdom with my community. So thanks again, and thanks for everyone for coming on and sharing your time on Monday night with all of us. Remember, next week we're not going to be here as it's going to be the long weekend, so we're going to skip a week, but we're going to be back and at it the following Monday. And we do have a special guest on as well, which we're going to be talking about a different type of lending opportunity. So it's really exciting. I'm going to share it in our chat. For those of you who are not in our WhatsApp chat that are on the call, I posted it in the group chat as well. So thanks everyone for coming, and I look forward to seeing you all in a couple weeks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.